Today, we are diving deep into the world of genetics. And we're about to see that the real story of how we get our traits is way more complex and honestly a lot more interesting than what you might remember from biology class. I mean, you definitely remember Gregor Mendel and his pea plants, right? He's the one who gave us the basic rules of genetics. One trait is dominant, the other is recessive. It all seemed so straightforward. Simple, clean, predictable. It was the perfect place to start for understanding how this all works. But here's the catch. While Mendel's work was absolutely groundbreaking, it was really just chapter 1. Because nature is just full of examples that don't fit into these neat and tidy little boxes. So what happens when genetics gets messy? All right, so first we need to step away from those simple peas in a pod and really see what happens when the basic rules start to bend. So Mendel gave us this brilliant framework, the idea that traits are passed down through these little units we now call genes. But you know what? The real story isn't just about the genes themselves. Later on, scientists discovered it's all about how those genes interact with each other, creating a picture that is so much more detailed than a simple dominant versus recessive story. And maybe the absolute best example of this complexity, well, it's literally running through your veins right now. Yep, I'm talking about your blood type. Let's try to solve this blood type puzzle together. Just think about it for a second. We inherit one version of a gene, we call it an allele, from each parent. So going back to Mendel's peas, you could have tall-tall, tall-dwarf, or dwarf-dwarf. That's 2 alleles giving you 3 possible combinations. So how in the world do we end up with 4 different blood types, A, B, and O, from just 2 parents? It feels like it breaks the rules, doesn't it? Well, the answer to the puzzle actually lies in a pretty simple but really powerful idea. What if, for some genes, there aren't just 2 options, but more? And this brings us to our first big idea, multiple alleles. Think of it like this. While you, as one person, can only hold 2 cards in your hand, the deck itself might have all sorts of different cards in it. It's the exact same with genes. Any single person only has 2 alleles for a trait, but in the entire human gene pool, there can be 3, 4, or even more versions of that gene floating around. So for the ABO blood group, the gene, which we call I, doesn't have 2 alleles, it actually has 3. You've got the IA allele, which codes for a type of sugar on your red blood cells that we call type A. Then there's the IB allele, which codes for a slightly different sugar, type B. And finally, there's a third allele, written as a lowercase I, which doesn't code for any sugar at all. Okay, so let's see how these combos actually play out. You get 1 allele from mom, 1 from dad. If you get an IA from both, or 1 IA and that I allele, your blood type is A. Same logic applies for type B. But notice that the I allele is recessive. It only really makes its presence known if you get 2 copies of it, which gives you type O blood. So that explains A, B, and O. But what about that mysterious AB blood type? To solve that final piece of the puzzle, we need a second really cool concept. Because it turns out, alleles don't always fight for who gets to be dominant. Sometimes they actually agree to share the spotlight. This is something we call codominance. It's what happens when a person has 2 different dominant alleles for a gene, but neither one actually masks the other. Instead, they're both fully and separately expressed. So the result is a phenotype, the trait you can actually see, that shows characteristics from both parents at the exact same time. And that is precisely what's going on with AB blood type. If you get the IA allele from one parent and the IB allele from the other, your red blood cells don't just pick one. Nope, they produce both the A-type sugar and the B-type sugar. Neither one is dominant over the other, they are codominant. And just like that, you have a perfect explanation for that 4th blood type. So you've got your classic dominance, where one allele just completely hides the other. You've got codominance, like we just saw, where they're both expressed. And there's even something called incomplete dominance, where they kind of blend together to make something new. But all of these are just describing how different versions of a single gene interact. The next layer of this whole thing is when totally different genes start influencing each other. Okay, so after all of that, what are the real rules of inheritance? Let's zoom out for a second and look at the big picture here. The most important thing to take away is that inheritance isn't just a simple set of rules. It's a dynamic, living system. We've seen that one gene can have lots of different alleles in a population. We've seen that those alleles can share power through codominance.
And we've even touched on the fact that different genes can influence each other's expression. It's exactly this kind of complexity that creates the incredible biodiversity we see all around us. And this right here is probably the deepest insight from the source material. Dominance isn't some built-in feature of a gene. It's all about what the gene produces, its gene product. So, in our blood type example, the gene product was a sugar on a blood cell. The rules of dominance are just describing how those physical products, the sugars, interact. It tells us the rules aren't set in stone. They completely depend on the physical and chemical context of the body.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? If the single gene for our blood type involves multiple alleles and codominance, just imagine the incredibly intricate dance that's happening between the thousands and thousands of other genes that shape everything that makes you, well, you. The simple rules were just the opening act for a much deeper and way more fascinating story.